We are tackling something today that really sits at the very core of advanced English fluency.
Absolutely.
We're looking at this massive stack of linguistic notes, usage cases, and real-world conversational data. And it is entirely focused on English phrasal verbs.
Right.
Now, if you're listening to this right now, you likely already have a pretty strong grasp of English vocabulary. I mean, you probably know the longest, most complex words in the dictionary.
Yeah, the academic stuff.
Exactly. But true native-level fluency, the kind that actually allows you to sound completely natural, entirely persuasive, and just deeply nuanced. It doesn't usually come from those massive words.
It really doesn't.
It comes from mastering these small two-part phrases that dictate the entire rhythm of everyday communication. So today's mission is to unlock the semantic richness of 30 highly versatile phrasal verbs.
And we're going to see how they live and breathe across, 90 distinct real-world scenarios?
90 of them, yeah. It's a lot, but it is a vital layer of the language to uncover.
It really is. And when we talk about establishing an analytical framework for these structures, we have to look way past their basic dictionary definitions.
Right.
The really fascinating element of phrasal verbs is how they operate as spatial and physical metaphors.
Spatial metaphors.
Yeah, historically, almost all of these phrases evolved from literal, tangible actions. They describe things you do with your hands, how you move your feet, or just how you interact with objects in a physical space.
Okay, so very grounded in the physical world.
Exactly. And over time, those literal movements transformed into these really profound metaphors for human emotions, complex social dynamics, and honestly, the mechanics of our modern lives.
So by analyzing the physical root of a phrase...
You can completely decode its psychological meaning.
Yeah.
It shifts your perspective from just, memorizing a vocabulary flashcards to actually understanding the special mapping of the English mind.
I love that, the spatial mapping of the mind. So to keep us grounded as we work through all this material, we've organized these 30 verbs into 5 thematic chapters.
Perfect.
We are going to start internally and work our way outward. The journey begins with emotional landscapes, moving into the social sphere, then into confrontation and retreat, followed by the mechanics of life, and finally, transitions and resolutions.
A very logical progression.
Yeah, the goal here is that whether you are prepping for a high-stakes professional environment or analyzing interpersonal behavior or just seeking a deeper understanding of linguistic evolution, these patterns are going to fundamentally change how you process spoken English.
It's a progression from the internal pressures of the human psyche straight through to how we physically organize our external reality.
Okay, let's just jump right in. Segment 1, the pressure cooker of human emotion.
The pressure cooker.
Yeah, the materials here show how English utilizes tangible concepts of pressure, temperature, and direction to describe highly subjective internal moods. And the very first verb our source provides is bottle up.
Ah, classic.
We all generally understand this means to hide our emotions, keep them inside rather than discussing them. But what really stands out in the usage notes here is that this phrase is almost exclusively deployed as a warning.
All right, it's cautionary.
Exactly. It's framed as emotional advice regarding something deeply unhealthy. Our text brings up a very common conversational scenario, warning a friend that if they keep bottling up their anger, they will eventually explode.
And the spatial metaphor at play there is just incredibly revealing.
How so?
Well, when the language uses bottle up, it is actively treating the human mind or the human emotional capacity as a finite, rigid container.
Like an actual glass bottle.
Yeah, a bottle is made of glass or stiff plastic. It doesn't expand. It has strict, unyielding limits.
Right.
When you examine the psychological insight embedded in that physical metaphor, the physical consequence becomes completely inevitable. If you introduce constant, increasing pressure into a rigid container that cannot expand.
Physics takes over.
Exactly. The laws of physics dictate that it must rupture. That is precisely why the text pairs the act of bottling up with the violent consequence of exploding. The language is literally applying fluid dynamics to human frustration.
That makes the behavioral reality of it so vivid. I mean, the source provides another angle on this, describing a person who tends to bottle everything up instead of telling their partner what is wrong.
Yeah.
You can almost visualize the physical act of someone tightening a plastic cap on their own throat, just refusing to let the pressure release.
Oh, that's a great image.
And that imagery leads directly into the standard advice our materials highlight, which is don't bottle it up, just tell me how you're feeling.
See, the language itself is functioning as both a diagnostic tool and a prescription.
Oh, interesting.
If the diagnosis is a dangerously pressurized container, the linguistic cure is effortless. You simply remove the cap.
Right, by speaking.
By speaking your feelings, you release the pressure valve before the structural integrity of the container fails.
But what happens when that structural integrity does fail? That brings us to our next phrase, which is breakdown.
Yes.
Our notes divide this into two distinct categories. On one hand, we have pure mechanical failure. The classic scenario provided is a car breaking down on a highway in the middle of the night.
Very literal.
Very literal. On the other hand, we have human vulnerability, where a person loses emotional control, often crying after receiving bad news.
The foundation of the phrase is heavily rooted in mechanics. Think about a vehicle on a highway. It's a highly complex machine, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's relying on hundreds of moving parts operating in perfect synchronization to maintain forward momentum. When a critical component fails, the unified whole ceases to function. It breaks into a state of being down.
And down is significant here.
Very. In English directional metaphor, down equates to a complete lack of energy, momentum, or operational capacity.
I see where you're going with this. So when we apply that exact same phrasing to a person hearing devastating news like, she broke down in tears, we aren't just saying she cried.
No, we aren't.
We are fundamentally equating her emotional stamina to an engine.
Precisely. The language makes zero distinction between a combustion engine failing under stress and a human nervous system failing under grief. We view human emotional capacity as a mechanical system.
That's wild to think about.
When the psychological stress surpasses the system's operational limits, the system simply breaks down. What I find incredibly empathetic about this linguistic structure is the removal of blame.
Because it's a mechanical failure.
Right. Just as a car doesn't willfully choose to snap an axle on a dark highway, a person doesn't choose to collapse in tears. It's framed as an uncontrollable system overload. The machinery has temporarily failed.
But there is a third usage in our source material that shifts away from both the highway and the human heart.
The analytical one?
Yes, it applies this phrase to analytical tasks. The example given is a professional asking a colleague to break down the costs because they need to see the details of a project.
Right.
We go from systemic failure to a financial spreadsheet. How does the metaphor survive that jump?
It survives because the underlying mechanics of the phrase pivot from accidental destruction to intentional dismantling.
Okay, intentional dismantling.
Yeah. In an analytical context, a massive, overwhelming concept like a total project budget can be totally opaque. It's too large to comprehend as a single entity.
Right, it's just a giant number.
Exactly. To understand it, you must intentionally fracture it into its component pieces. You are dismantling the unified whole so that you can inspect the individual gears. So the act of a whole breaking into pieces can result in a stranded vehicle, emotional release, or crystal clear financial clarity.
Depending entirely on whether the breaking was accidental or deliberate.
Exactly.
That is a fascinating way to connect those concepts.
Yeah.
Now, moving from the chaos of a breakdown, we look at the process of stabilization with calm down.
Ah, yes.
We use this to describe the transition from an agitated, angry, or upset state into a quiet, relaxed one. The materials highlight three highly varied contexts, telling a furious colleague they need to calm down before saying something they regret.
Which happens a lot.
Describing an exhausted baby finally calming down and falling asleep, and waiting for a meteorological storm to calm down before going outside.
The essential element to analyze here is the directional vector of the word down.
Again with the directions.
Yes. In the English linguistic framework, high energy, intense emotion, chaos, and anger are almost universally mapped to an upward trajectory.
Like blood pressure goes up.
Blood pressure goes up, voices are raised up, tensions run high, situations escalate upward.
Right.
Therefore, rationality, peace, and rest are intrinsically linked to a downward trajectory. To calm down is to command a literal lowering of the heart rate, a lowering of the physical volume, a grounding of the energy.
That spatial mapping explains why it's so versatile. An enraged professional, a crying infant, and a literal hurricane are completely different entities, but linguistically, they are all just systems of high-energy chaos.
Exactly.
They have peaked, and their energy must be directed downward to return to baseline.
It strips away all the situational complexity, the reasons for the anger, the cause of the tears, the atmospheric pressure of the weather, and focuses purely on managing the energy level.
Let's look at a scenario where the energy is high, but the emotion is positive, yet it still results in a loss of control.
Oh, this is a fun one.
The phrase is carry away. Our notes indicate this means losing self-control due to sudden excitement or enthusiasm. The usage note specifies it's heavily used in a passive construction, as in getting carried away.
Right.
The primary example is incredibly relatable. Going to a store, getting a bit carried away, and buying 5 pairs of shoes.
The grammatical structure of that sentence is doing a lot of heavy lifting. When someone says, I got carried away, they are utilizing the passive voice to suggest that their own excitement acted as an external physical force.
Like it wasn't their fault.
Exactly. They're framing the enthusiasm as a sudden river current that swept them off their feet, or a gust of wind that physically lifted them and removed them from their logical foundation.
So it's essentially a linguistic mechanism to absolve yourself of agency. You're saying, my rational brain didn't decide to buy 5 pairs of shoes. The environment generated an enthusiasm that abducted my wallet.
It is the perfect defense mechanism for minor excesses. Look at the second scenario in the text. Warning someone not to get carried away with party decorations because there is a strict budget.
Right.
The speaker recognizes that the external force of excitement is threatening to overpower the rational constraints of financial planning. They are warning the person to stay grounded.
And the third scenario shows the pure, joyful extreme of this. A person getting carried away by the music and dancing on a table.
Yes.
The music, literally, in the metaphor, transports the person from the grounded floor to an elevated surface, completely stripping away their social inhibitions.
It is the temporary surrender of logic to a powerful external emotional stimulus.
So if being carried away elevates you through excitement, let's examine a phrase designed to elevate you from despair, which is cheer up. The source defines this simply as becoming happier or making someone else feel better. The examples range from the direct command to cheer up, things will get better, to active interventions like buying flowers for a sad friend or relying on a favorite comedy movie to cheer oneself up.
This creates a brilliant structural contrast with calm down. Remember, anger and chaos are high-energy states that must be brought down.
Right?
Sadness, grief, and depression, however, are viewed in English as low-energy states. We describe people as feeling down or being down in the dumps or sinking into depression.
Because they're below the baseline?
Exactly. Because the emotional baseline is set at 0 and the person has sunk below it, the required directional vector for a cure must be upward. To cheer up is to throw down a metaphorical rope and elevate the person out of their emotional trench.
The flowers or the comedy movie act as the pulley system. You are providing the upward force.
Perfectly said.
Which sets up our final verb in the emotional segment perfectly, because it is the exact opposite action. Bring down.
Yeah.
This is defined as making someone feel sad or depressed. But crucially, it also means to cause a government or a powerful person to lose their authority.
Quite a leap.
Yeah. The source illustrates the emotional side with the experience of listening to a sad song that really brings me down.
Notice the introduction of active force with the verb bring. Unlike a passive sinking feeling, bring down implies an active agent is applying pressure.
Right. The song is doing it to you.
Exactly. The sad music isn't just playing, it is carrying a heavy emotional weight, placing it squarely on your shoulders and physically forcing your mood below the baseline.
But the leap in scale is what makes this phrase so impressive. The next example states, the scandal finally brought down the prime minister. And the third discusses trying to bring down the price of a house.
Yeah.
We go from a melancholy playlist to a geopolitical collapse to real estate negotiations.
And this represents one of the most powerful concepts in advanced English fluency. The micro and the macro operate on the exact same linguistic physics. A prime minister holds a high office. They sit at the peak of a hierarchy. A scandal generates massive critical weight. That weight is applied to the high office, and the sheer gravity forces the politician downward, stripping them of their elevated status.
That makes total sense.
The same applies to an inflated house price. The buyer must apply negotiating pressure to force the elevated number downward. Whether you're manipulating a fleeting mood, a national government, or a housing market, the language relies on understanding the simple application of downward force.
That perfectly transitions us out of the internal pressure cooker and into segment 2. The social sphere. We're moving from how we feel to how we interact.
Let's do it.
This chapter of our source material covers the messy web of human connection, spanning casual encounters, romantic pursuits, and deep betrayals. Let's start at the very inception of a romantic connection with the phrase, ask out.
A highly stressful phrase.
It is. The definition is straightforward, to invite someone on a date. But the critical usage note provided is that this phrase is strictly romantic. You do not use it for platonic friends.
Yeah.
The first conversational example highlights the anxiety involved. He finally found the courage to ask her out to dinner.
The inclusion of the word courage in that example is entirely dependent on the strict romantic boundary of the phrase.
Because of the risk.
Because asking out cannot be mistaken for a casual, friendly invitation. It carries a massive inherent risk. It's a definitive declaration of romantic intent. To use this phrase is to expose yourself to the very real possibility of romantic rejection.
Exactly. If I just say, hey, let's grab lunch on Tuesday, there's a layer of plausible deniability. It could just be networking. But if I ask you out, the ambiguity is instantly destroyed. I am stating my intentions.
The safety net is gone.
The text captures this fear perfectly with a second example. I want to ask him out, but I'm too nervous about what he'll say.
The phrase acts as a strict linguistic border crossing. It is the checkpoint between friendship and romance.
Right.
And the third example from our notes addresses the confusion that happens when that checkpoint isn't clearly marked. Did Jerry ever ask you out, or are you guys just friends?
I've definitely heard that conversation before.
We all have. The speaker in the scenario is looking for absolute clarity regarding a social dynamic. The presence or absence of the specific phrase ask out is the only thing that can provide that definitive answer.
Now, if the asking out goes poorly, or the feelings aren't mutual, we might encounter our next phrase, chase after.
Oh boy.
Yeah. The source defines this as pursuing someone or something physically or romantically. It bridges the gap between a literal pursuit, like a dog chasing a cat,
Yeah.
and an emotional pursuit where one person is seeking affection from another.
Right.
The literal baseline is established with the first example, a dog spending all afternoon chasing after squirrels.
That physical baseline is crucial for understanding the emotional metaphor. In a literal chase, you have two entities. One is fleeing, highly motivated to escape. The other is pursuing, expending massive amounts of energy to close the distance.
Right.
Now, map that physical reality onto the emotional advice given in the second example. Stop chasing after someone who doesn't even care about you.
It fundamentally alters how we view the relationship dynamic. It strips away all the romance.
It does. It forces us to confront the power dynamics embedded in the language. When a speaker uses chase after in the context of human affection, they are placing the pursuer in a position of severe deficit.
Wow, yeah.
The object of affection is equated to the fleeing squirrel. They're elusive, uninterested, and actively creating distance. The person doing the chasing is expending desperate emotional energy. Linguistically, it is not a flattering position to occupy. It carries a heavy tone of undignified desperation.
That deficit of power remains even when the pursuit is justified, though.
How do you mean?
Look at the third example provided. A security guard chasing after a shoplifter. The guard has the moral and legal high ground, but structurally, the thief has the stolen goods and the head start.
I see.
The guard is still operating from a deficit, forced to exert extreme physical effort to recapture control of the situation.
That's a great point. Whether the target is a squirrel, an unrequited love, or a fleeing criminal chasing after, always implies a frantic struggle to capture something that vehemently desires to remain free.
Okay, let's look at what happens when a connection is actually established, a commitment is made, but then the trust is broken. The phrase is cheat on.
The heavy one.
Very.
Yeah.
Our materials define this as being unfaithful to a romantic partner, or acting dishonestly in an academic setting like a test. The severity spectrum here is incredibly wide.
Yeah, it really jumps around.
The first example carries immense emotional gravity. She was devastated when she found out he was cheating on her.
In a romantic context, that phrase represents the ultimate violation of a foundational trust. It is the destruction of an intimate agreement between two people. The emotional fallout is profound.
But then the English language takes that exact same phrase with all its heavy connotations of betrayal and applies it to a schoolroom in the second example. He got caught cheating on the final exam. And then it takes it a step further into the mundane with the third example. Have you ever cheated on a diet?
That is quite the spectrum.
We use the exact same two words for devastating infidelity, academic dishonesty, and the mild guilt of eating a piece of cake when you promised yourself you'd eat a salad.
It seems almost absurd to use the same language for a ruined marriage and a ruined diet, but there is a deeply logical thread connecting them.
What is it?
The core concept of cheating on someone or something is the act of breaking a covenant. A covenant is a solemn, binding agreement. In a relationship, the covenant is fidelity and mutual respect. On a university exam, the covenant is the code of academic integrity you agree to by enrolling.
And on a diet.
On a diet, the covenant is a private, internal promise you made to your own physical body. The consequences range from lifelong heartbreak to a slight spike in blood sugar, but the mechanical action, the deliberate breach of an agreed-upon rule, is linguistically identical.
When that covenant is broken in a relationship, it usually leads to our next verb, break up.
Yes, the inevitable result.
We know this means to end a romantic relationship, but our source also highlights its use in dispersing a crowd or a physical fight. And finally, it applies to technology, specifically poor phone connections.
Right.
Let's look at the emotional severance first. I think Tom and Sarah are going to break up soon.
We see a return to the structural concepts we discussed with breakdown earlier. The language conceptualizes Tom and Sarah not as two individuals, but as a singular, unified entity, a couple.
Like a solid object.
Exactly. The relationship is a solid structure. To bend it is to apply force until that unified structure shatters, fracturing back into two separate, disconnected pieces.
And we see that concept of forced dispersal applied to the physical world in the second example. The police arrive to break up the fight in the parking lot.
Here, the unified entity isn't a romance. It is a violent conflict. A fight requires two or more people locked together in a unified system of aggression. Without proximity, the fight ceases to exist. When the police arrive, they act as the wedge. They force themselves into the center of the conflict, fracturing the structure, dispersing the individuals, and effectively shattering the fight into non-existence.
And the third context takes that concept of a severed connection into the digital realm. You're breaking up. I can't hear you clearly on this phone.
The structural entity in this case is the audio signal. A phone call relies on a continuous, unbroken stream of digital data linking to devices.
And when it breaks,
When interference occurs, that solid stream is fractured. It shatters into disconnected fragments of static, silence, and partial words. The connection has literally broken into pieces.
let's tone down the drama slightly and look at a social phrase that doesn't necessarily end relationships, but certainly strains them. Blow off.
Ah, the flakes.
Yes. The definition provided is ignoring someone or canceling plans at the very last minute without a valid reason. The usage notes classify it as highly informal, typically used when expressing annoyance at a flaky friend.
Very common.
The first scenario is a classic complaint. I can't believe she blew me off to go to the movies with her sister.
To understand the contempt embedded in this phrase, we have to visualize the literal physical action of blowing something off a surface.
Okay, picture that.
Imagine a tiny speck of dust or a piece of lint resting on your jacket sleeve. It has no mass, no value, and no gravity. Removing it requires zero effort. You simply exhale and the breath sweeps it away. You only perform this action on things that are utterly insignificant.
Wow, that analysis makes the social insult so clear. When you accuse someone of blowing you off, you aren't just saying they canceled plans. You are explicitly accusing them of treating your time, your effort, and your friendship as if it were a weightless speck of dust on their sleeve.
Exactly.
You're offended because they dismissed you with a breath.
It is a profound accusation of disrespect. We see this actively weaponized in the second example, where a speaker advises a friend, just blow him off, he's not worth your time anyway.
Right, actively choosing to dismiss someone.
The advice is to intentionally reduce this person's perceived value to zero. Do not engage with them, do not argue with them. Just treat them as weightless and let the breeze take them.
And we could apply this dismissive attitude to our own responsibilities, as seen in the third scenario. I had a meeting today, but I decided to blow it off and go to the beach.
A bold move.
The speaker is treating their professional obligations with the same flippant, casual disregard as lint on a shirt. It's an assertion that the meeting carries no gravity in their life.
It perfectly encapsulates the casual arrogance of ignoring an established commitment.
Our final phrase in the social sphere relies heavily on chance. Bump into. This simply means to meet someone unexpectedly. We use it constantly when talking about running into people we know in public spaces.
Right.
The materials provide three distinct emotional reactions to this phenomenon. The first is pure, joyful serendipity. You'll never guess who I bumped into at the mall today.
The linguistic choice here is fascinating. The language utilizes the illusion of a physical collision to represent a purely social occurrence. You didn't actually physically ram your shoulder into your friend at the mall.
Hopefully not.
But a city is a massive, chaotic space. The mathematical odds of two specific individuals occupying the exact same square footage at the exact same second without prior coordination are so low that when it happens, it feels like a metaphysical collision. The trajectories of your lives momentarily crash together.
It does feel like a sudden impact. But the nature of that impact depends entirely on the person you collide with. The second scenario introduces a sense of ongoing dread. I keep bumping into my ex-boyfriend everywhere I go.
In this context, the serendipity curdles into a curse. The illusion of the collision is no longer a joyful surprise. It feels abrasive, unwanted, and jarring. The repetitive nature of it, keep bumping into, makes the social environment feel claustrophobic.
And the ultimate social friction is captured in the third scenario. I hope I don't bump into my boss while I'm out shopping.
Oh, the worst.
We have all experienced that specific anxiety. You are in your weekend clothes, trying to buy groceries, actively monitoring the aisles to avoid a collision that would force you to merge your professional and personal lives right there in the canned goods section.
It perfectly maps the low-level friction of modern social existence. Our social circles overlap in unpredictable ways, and these metaphorical collisions are a constant, inevitable threat to our carefully curated boundaries.
Sometimes those boundaries aren't just bumped into, they are aggressively breached.
Ah.
And that transitions us into segment 3, confrontation, support, and retreat.
The battlefield segment.
Yes. In this chapter, we're analyzing the advanced English vocabulary used to describe aggression, loyalty, ego, and surrender. We begin with the most aggressive phrase on the list, beat up.
Very aggressive.
The source defines this first as a literal physical assault, and secondarily as criticizing oneself or another person very harshly. The baseline is established with a scenario of pure street violence. He got beat up by a group of guys outside the club.
This represents the blunt, literal application of the words. It is the infliction of repeated physical strikes resulting in bodily damage. The direction up in this context usually functions as an intensifier in English.
Like it doesn't actually mean upward movement.
No, not here. It means the beating was thorough and complete, much like eating up all your food or burning up in a fire. The action was taken to its absolute limit.
Okay, but the brilliance of the language emerges when we take that literal brutality and turn it inward, which is what happens in the second example. Don't beat yourself up over one mistake. Everyone fails sometimes.
This is a stunning example of linguistic psychological violence. The speaker is conceptualizing the human mind as a split entity.
Split how?
You have the fragile ego, which made the mistake, and you have the harsh inner critic. The phrase frames the inner critic as the group of guys outside the club inflicting repeated, damaging emotional strikes against the ego. When we comfort a friend and tell them not to beat themselves up, we are actively pleading with them to stop being their own abuser. We are asking them to call off the internal mob. It's a deeply compassionate sentiment, but it's entirely wrapped in the imagery of a street brawl.
That is such a powerful way to visualize guilt. And the language doesn't stop with the human mind either. The third scenario applies this violence to the environment. The storm really beat up the old house. The roof is a mess.
Here we see environmental violence. The storm is personified. It becomes the aggressor, throwing high-speed wind, hail, and rain like a flurry of physical punches against the structure of the house. For anyone listening right now and striving for advanced fluency, its ability to take a phrase rooted in a bar fight and seamlessly apply it to a guilt trip and then to severe weather, that is the ultimate demonstration of metaphorical agility.
From a physical beating, we escalate to an explosive reaction. The phrase is blow up. The literal meaning is to explode or be destroyed by a bomb. The metaphorical meaning is to suddenly and violently lose your temper. The Hollywood baseline is set with the first example. The car blew up just seconds after the driver escaped.
This is rapid combustion. It's an outward, uncontrollable expansion of energy resulting in total destruction. The container, the car, fails catastrophically under the pressure of the expanding force.
Keep that image of the Hollywood fireball in your mind as we look at the second scenario, which applies this physics to a suburban father. My dad is going to blow up when he sees what happened to the car.
Semantically, the mechanics are identical. The language asks us to picture the father's anger as a volatile gas. As he processes the damage to the car, the anger rapidly expands inside him. The internal pressure surpasses his emotional capacity to contain it, and he detonates.
He blows up.
His temper completely destroys the peace of the household. The critical element here is the suddenness. A blow-up is not a slow, lingering resentment. It is an instantaneous, uncontrollable threshold event.
But the phrase has a completely innocent functional utility as well. which makes the third example almost comical in its contrast. Could you blow up these balloons for the party?
It seems like a contradiction, but the underlying physics of the phrase remains perfectly consistent. You are introducing rapid expansion of air inside a container.
Right, the mechanics are the same.
The only difference is that a rubber balloon is specifically engineered to expand and accommodate the pressure without reaching the critical threshold of destruction. Of course, if you misjudge the capacity and continue to blow it up, you return immediately to the primary definition.
An explosion.
Exactly.
Let's move from expanding pressure to breaching perimeters. The phrase is break in. Our materials define this as entering a building by force illegally, or are interrupting a conversation. The first context is a standard crime report. Someone tried to break in through the back window last night.
This is the literal circumvention of a physical boundary. A window is a defensive structure meant to separate the safety of the interior from the threats of the exterior. The verb break indicates that force was applied to destroy the integrity of that boundary, and the preposition in dictates the direction of the trespass.
Now let's observe how that criminal trespass maps onto social etiquette in the second scenario. I hate to break in on your conversation, but there's a phone call for you.
This is a remarkable social mapping. When two people are engaged in a private conversation, they generate an invisible social perimeter. They construct an auditory room around themselves.
And you have to enter it.
When a third party needs to deliver a message, they must forcefully breach that invisible boundary. By prefacing the interruption with, "I hate to break in," the speaker is acknowledging that their action is a minor social crime. They are essentially saying, "I recognize I am trespassing on your private architecture, and I apologize for the necessary force."
It acknowledges the friction of the interruption.
Yeah.
And then we have a third scenario that shifts away from both crime and conversation, focusing purely on physical resistance. You need to break in those new shoes before you go on a long walk.
This usage beautifully unites the entire concept. Think about the nature of brand new leather shoes. They are stiff, unyielding, and they act as a resistant boundary against the natural movement of your foot.
They fight back.
They do. To break them in is to apply repeated physical force walking, bending, stretching, until the material's initial resistance is overcome and it yields to the shape of the wearer. Whether it is a burglar defeating a window lock, a colleague defeating the privacy of a chat, or your heel defeating stiff leather, breaking in always represents the process of overcoming initial resistance to force entry or establish comfort.
After all that aggression and breaking of boundaries, the language must provide a mechanism for yielding. That mechanism is the phrase, back down.
Retreat.
Yes, our notes define this as withdrawing from a fight, argument, or a claim, usually because of intimidation or the realization that you are wrong. It is highly common in politics, debates, and confrontations. The first example highlights a standoff. Neither of the politicians wanted to back down from their position.
Here we enter the complex psychology of ego retreat. Consider the physical posture of an argument. Two entities are standing face to face, leaning forward, pressing their claims against one another.
Right, very aggressive posture.
To back down requires two simultaneous physical metaphors. Taking a physical step backward to yield space, and lowering your posture to reduce aggression. In the combative arena of politics, retreating and lowering your defenses is almost universally viewed as a fatal sign of weakness, which explains the absolute refusal of either party to initiate the movement.
But stepping backward isn't always a flaw. The second scenario shows the intellectual virtue in yielding. He realized he was wrong, so he eventually backed down.
In this case, the ego retreat is not driven by cowardice or intimidation. It is driven by logic, maturity, and the introduction of new data. The physical metaphor of stepping back remains the same, but the internal motivation is entirely different. It represents intellectual honesty over stubborn pride.
And there is a specific satisfaction in forcing a hostile entity to take that step backward, as seen in the third scenario. The bully backed down once someone stood up to him.
That is the moment the bluff is called. A bully projects a massive aura of forward momentum. When they meet unexpected resistance, when someone literally stands up and refuses to yield space, the bully's artificial ego collapses. They are forced to initiate the retreat they intended for their victim.
But what if the retreat isn't driven by logic, and it isn't the collapse of a bully's ego? What if it's just pure, unadulterated terror?
Then you chicken out.
Then you chicken out. This categorized as informal slang, meaning to decide not to do something at the last minute because of fear. The classic adrenaline scenario is provided. I was going to go skydiving, but I chickened out at the last second.
If backing down implies a calculated retreat involving ego, logic, or social pressure, chickening out is driven entirely by a sudden, overwhelming spike of primal fear.
The animal instinct.
Exactly. The linguistic choice is highly evocative. We culturally associate chickens with nervous, frantic, erratic, and fearful energy. To chicken out is to abandon your higher cognitive functions and succumb to animalistic panic.
We see how that panic interacts with social expectations in the second example, which is pure peer pressure. Don't chicken out now. You promised you'd do it.
Shaming them into it.
Yeah, the speaker is trying to use the shame associated with the slang to override the fear. And the third example proves this phrase isn't reserved for jumping out of airplanes. It applies perfectly to the professional world. He wanted to ask her for a raise, but he chickened out.
This is a crucial validation of human anxiety. Walking into a manager's office to demand a higher salary can trigger the exact same biological threat response as standing at the open door of an airplane.
The physiological response is the same.
Exactly. The heart rate spikes, the palms sweat, cortisol floods the system, and the nervous energy forces a complete retreat. The perceived threat is financial and social rather than physical, but the frantic need to escape is identical.
Hopefully, when you face those high-stakes moments, you aren't alone. You want someone to back up.
Yes. Support.
This is our final phrase in the conflict segment. The source defines it as supporting someone, either emotionally or by providing verifying evidence. Crucially, it also retains its literal meaning of moving a vehicle or a person backward in space. Let's examine the emotional and professional support first. If the boss gets angry, will you back me up?
Let's unpack the spatial reassurance embedded in this request. If you are entering a contentious meeting and the boss directs their anger at you, you are isolated on the front line of the conflict.
You're all alone.
To ask a colleague to back you up is to ask them to position themselves metaphorically directly behind you. Their presence prevents you from being pushed backward by the force of the boss's argument. They're reinforcing your position, adding their mass to yours. It is the ultimate expression of professional solidarity and loyalty.
That spatial mapping is so clear, and it relies entirely on the literal movement described in the second example. You need to back up the car a little so I can open the gate.
Exactly. Engaging the reverse gear and physically occupying the space behind your current position.
And then we see that physical movement weaponized by authority in the third scenario. The police officer told the crowd to back up and give them space.
The contrast here is what makes spatial language so brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
In the first scenario, you desperately want someone directly behind you to prevent retreat. In the third scenario, the police are actively forcing the crowd into a retreat to expand the safety perimeter in front of them. The direction is the same, but the intent shifts from support to control.
That brings us to segment 4, systems failing and progress prevailing. In this chapter, we are leaving the battlefield of human confrontation and exploring the verbs that dictate the mechanics of our daily lives.
The everyday stuff.
Exactly. How do we describe technological glitches, the pace of modern society, and our attempts to keep up? We start with the glitch. Act up.
I use this one all the time.
We all do. The definition provided is to behave badly, usually applied to children, but also heavily used to describe machines or body parts that are malfunctioning. The first scenario is universally frustrating. My computer has been acting up all morning. I think it has a virus.
I find this usage absolutely delightful because it relies on spontaneous personification. A computer is a lifeless, emotionless box constructed of metal, silicon, and plastic. It possesses zero free will.
Yet we yell at it.
When it encounters an error and fails to execute our commands, the human brain instinctively projects rebellion onto the machine. We accuse the laptop of acting like a petulant child throwing a tantrum. It is a psychological coping mechanism. It helps us process our immense frustration by giving the inert object a mischievous, disobedient personality.
It makes perfect sense when you consider the baseline usage provided in the second example, which refers to actual human behavior. The kids usually start acting up when they are tired or bored. It describes that specific brand of restless, uncooperative, boundary-pushing energy.
Precisely. And the linguistic projection doesn't stop at electronics. We apply that exact same concept of uncooperative rebellion to our own biology in the third scenario. My old knee injury starts acting up whenever it rains.
Oh, wow.
The speaker is linguistically severing their knee from the rest of their body, treating it as a separate, disobedient entity that refuses to follow instructions based on the weather. We personify our own joints to explain our pain.
That is so true. When things stop acting up and simply die completely, though, we reach our next phrase, blackout.
The void.
The materials define this as losing consciousness and fainting, or a total loss of electrical power. It covers medical emergencies, excessive alcohol consumption, and citywide infrastructure failures. The medical baseline is established first. He blacked out for a few seconds after hitting his head.
The imagery here relies on the total erasure of perception. The conscious human mind operates like an illuminated screen, constantly projecting sensory input and processing the environment. A severe head trauma unplugs the power source to that screen.
Everything goes dark.
The feed goes entirely black. There is no memory recorded, no sensory data collected, just a void in the timeline.
And then we scale that terrifying void up to the macro level with the second example. The whole neighborhood blacked out during the thunderstorm.
Once again, we see the macro and the micro mirroring each other perfectly. The electrical grid of a modern city functions identically to the neural network of a human brain. It routes power and light to millions of nodes.
Right.
When the severe weather strikes a critical substation, the physical lights of the city are extinguished, creating the exact same dark void in the physical world that the concussion created in the conscious mind.
The third scenario explores a self-inflicted void.
Yeah.
I drank so much last night that I completely blacked out.
It is the ultimate voluntary erasure of memory through excess. The hardware is still functioning, the body is awake and moving, but the internal recording software has been completely plunged into darkness.
If the power goes out or the weather is terrible, you might have to execute our next phrase, call off.
Cancellation.
The source defines this as canceling an event or a planned activity. The usage notes specify that this applies to wide-ranging events like sporting matches, weddings, police searches, or labor strikes. The meteorological impact is clear in the first example. The game was called off because of the heavy rain.
The most important linguistic distinction to draw here is the definitive, absolute finality of calling off an event versus simply postponing it.
They aren't the same.
Not at all. If an official postpones a baseball game, the event remains alive on the timeline. It has merely been shifted to a later date. If the official calls it off, they are vocally, formally decreeing that the event ceases to exist. It is a termination order.
That sense of termination makes the second scenario incredibly dramatic, bordering on tragic. They decided to call off the wedding at the last minute.
Ouch.
Right. You can immediately picture the chaotic fallout. The caterers packing up the food, the guests stranded in hotels, the absolute devastation of the families. It's not a delay for better weather. It is the death of a massive social contract.
And we see that same declarative authority applied to matters of life and death in the third scenario. The police called off the search when it got too dark.
A heavy decision.
Picture the scene. Helicopters in the air, dogs on the ground, dozens of officers scouring a forest. The commander issues a vocal order, a call over the radio to stand down. It is an admission of defeat against the environment, an assertion of authority terminating a critical operation.
Let's pivot away from failure and cancellation and look at a phrase that describes cognitive progress. Catch on.
A very satisfying phrase.
The meaning provided is to finally understand a concept, or to describe a trend becoming widely popular. The cognitive journey is mapped in the first example. He's a bit slow, but he'll catch on eventually.
Consider the physical agility required by the root verb catch. Imagine an idea, a joke, or a complex piece of information as a physical object, a ball thrown through the air.
Okay, flying through the air.
It is elusive, moving quickly, and initially difficult to track. The listener's brain reaches out into the abstract space and finally firmly grasps the object. That is the beautiful, satisfying cognitive click. The aha moment of comprehension is physically mapped as successfully catching a thrown object.
I think anyone who has studied an advanced language can intimately relate to that feeling. Staring at a grammar rule for hours, feeling like it's just flying past you, until finally your brain catches on.
It's a great feeling.
But how does that individual cognitive click translate to the second scenario? This new hairstyle is really starting to catch on with teenagers.
It represents a fascinating leap from individual psychology to collective sociology. In the first scenario, a single idea is caught by a single mind. In the second scenario, a cultural artifact, a hairstyle, a slang word, a fashion trend is thrown out into the social ether.
And society catches it.
Exactly. Slowly, individual members of a demographic reach out and grasp it, adopting it as their own. As more and more people catch it, the trend gains momentum until it becomes a defining feature of the group.
And the third scenario perfectly captures the micro version of that delayed reaction. I didn't understand the joke at first, but then I caught on.
The classic delayed laugh.
Yes. The joke hangs in the air, the silence stretches, the brain works frantically to process the double meaning, and then the penny drops. You catch it.
Exactly. The mind successfully making the connection after a brief delay.
But if your mind is too slow, or your legs are too tired, you might find yourself needing to catch up.
Ah, closing the gap.
This is defined as reaching the same level or position as someone else. Crucially, it also has a social definition. Talking to a friend you haven't seen in a long time to exchange news. The structural anxiety of the phrase is established in the first example. I missed a week of school, so I have a lot of work to catch up on.
The shared underlying tension of this phrase is the uncomfortable realization of being left behind. Imagine a timeline moving constantly forward. The rest of the class or the rest of the racing pack is progressing along that line.
But you're stuck.
Due to illness or absence, you become stationary. A significant gap forms between your position and the baseline of the group. To catch up means you cannot simply resume normal speed. You must exert double or triple the normal energy to accelerate, close the distance, and reintegrate with the forward momentum of the pack.
We see that literal physical exertion required in the third scenario. Go ahead, I'll catch up with you in 5 minutes.
Physical running to close the gap.
The speaker is allowing a physical distance to form on a walking trail, confident they can sprint to close the gap later. But I'm deeply curious about how this connects to the second scenario. We should grab coffee sometime and catch up. Where is the anxiety or the exertion in a casual coffee date?
In a social context, the anxiety is replaced by a desire for connection, but the structural mechanism closing a gap remains identical.
How so?
Think about it. When you haven't seen a close friend for 6 months, a massive gap in shared information forms. They have lived through relationship changes, job promotions, and daily frustrations that you know nothing about. Your timeline of their life is paused 6 months in the past.
Oh, that makes sense.
To catch up over coffee is to rapidly exchange all that missing data until your knowledge of their life matches their current, present reality. You are closing the informational gap so your friendship can move forward in sync.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize a simple chat over coffee. And once you have closed the gap, your only option is to maintain your momentum. That brings us to our final phrase in the mechanics segment. Carry on.
Keep calm and carry on.
We all know it. This means to continue doing something. The usage notes specifically mention its prominence in British English, as you just referenced, and its application in any environment where work must persist despite obstacles. The first scenario is a direct instruction. Just carry on with what you're doing and ignore me.
There is a deep, inherent stoicism embedded in this phrase. The verb carry implies the bearing of a physical weight or a burden.
Right.
To carry on suggests that a disruption has occurred, an interruption, a sudden noise, a stressful event, but the speaker is choosing, or being instructed, to bear the weight of their task and continue moving forward regardless of the friction.
We see that resilience perfectly illustrated in the second example. Despite the noise outside, the meeting carried on as usual.
They ignored the disruption.
The external chaos actively attempted to fracture the focus of the room, to break the meeting up. But the participants collectively refused to yield. They maintained their trajectory.
It is the absolute refusal to be derailed by external, uncontrollable circumstances.
And the third scenario tones the stoicism down into a polite, professional courtesy. I'll be back in a minute, please carry on.
A temporary vacuum.
Exactly. The speaker is leaving the room, creating a temporary vacuum of authority or participation, but they are explicitly commanding the machinery of the group to keep running in their absence.
It's all about protecting the momentum of the task against the inevitability of interruptions.
We have arrived at our fifth and final chapter, segment 5, spaces, places, and moving forward.
The home stretch.
In this concluding section, our materials guide us through the actions of transition, organization, and preparing for whatever comes next. We begin at the threshold of a new environment with check-in.
A very bureaucratic phrase.
It is. The primary definition is to register your arrival at a hotel or an airport. The secondary, emotional definition is to contact someone simply to ensure they are safe and doing well. Let's tackle the logistics first with scenarios 1 and 3. We need to check in at the hotel by 3:00 p.m., and you can check in for your flight online.
These scenarios represent the highly bureaucratic, systematic utilization of the phrase. You are interacting with a massive logistical framework, a hotel's room management software, or an airline's passenger manifest.
You're entering a system.
By checking in, you are verifying your physical or digital presence within their system. You are officially asserting, I have arrived at the designated space at the designated time, and I am claiming my reserved slot within your operation.
It is entirely transactional and cold. But what makes the English language so remarkable is how we take that rigid bureaucratic framework and soften it into something deeply compassionate in the second scenario. I'm just calling to check in and see how you're doing.
This is where the profound humanity of language shines through. We take the cold concept of verifying a status in a ledger and apply it to deep human empathy.
It's a beautiful shift.
When you check in on a friend, you are essentially calling up their emotional manifest. You are saying, I am verifying your well-being. Are you currently stationed in a place of safety and happiness, or do you require assistance? It takes the logistical concept of a systemic checkup and applies it directly to the human soul.
And naturally, every stay must eventually come to an end. That is the phrase, check out.
The departure.
The literal definition is to officially leave a hotel and pay your bill. The slang or informal definition is to direct your attention to look at something interesting or attractive.
Yeah.
The logistical finality is established in the first example. We have to check out of the room before noon.
This is the absolute severing of the connection. You are relinquishing your claim on the physical space. You settle your debts, return the key, and you are scrubbed from the active system. Your time in that specific environment has expired.
Which creates a magnificent contrast with the other usages provided in our notes. Scenario 2 commands, check out that cool car over there. And Scenario 3 declares, I'm going to check out that new restaurant tonight.
High energy usages.
We pivot from the depressing finality of vacating a room to the energetic beginning of a new experience. How does the language bridge that massive gap?
It bridges the gap through the concept of transitioning attention. When you check out of a hotel, you remove yourself from one environment to enter another.
Right.
When you tell a friend to check out a passing sports car, you are commanding them to transition their visual attention. You are demanding they pull their focus away from their current thoughts and engage with a new, fascinating data point that has just entered their environment. It is an enthusiastic call for active, engaged observation.
Once you've transitioned into a space, you often have to organize it. That is, clean up.
Time for chores.
The standard definition is to make a physical place tidy. The slang definition, which is incredibly useful for advanced speakers, means to suddenly make a massive amount of money.
A very fun slang term.
The baseline chore is seen in the first and third examples. We need to clean up the kitchen before the guests arrive, and the city is trying to clean up the local parks.
This represents the diligent restoration of order. Entropy naturally dictates that spaces become chaotic, kitchens get dirty, parks accumulate litter. To clean up is to apply human energy to reverse that entropy. You are erasing the dirt, organizing the chaos, and returning the environment to its optimal, pure condition.
But I want to spend time on the second scenario, because injecting this kind of slang into your vocabulary is what elevates you from a student of English to a master of it. He really cleaned up at the casino last night.
The slang usage is utterly fascinating from a sociological perspective because it equates the moral and physical virtue of cleanliness with the aggressive acquisition of wealth.
How does that visual work?
Picture the visual metaphor of a high-stakes poker table. The chips are scattered in a chaotic, messy pile in the center. To clean up implies that the winner took their arm and forcefully swept all those messy chips into their own neatly organized, massive pile in front of them, leaving the center of the table completely bare.
Wow, yes.
It takes the domestic virtue of tidying a room and applies it to absolute financial dominance over an opponent.
I can visualize that sweeping motion perfectly. But if sweeping the chips isn't enough, if you want to take organization to its absolute extreme, you must clear out.
The extreme version.
The materials define this as emptying a space completely or aggressively forcing people to leave an area quickly. We see the domestic application in the first scenario. I need to clear out the garage so I can park my car inside.
It is vital to recognize the difference in severity between clean up and clear out.
They seem similar.
They do, but if you spend your Saturday cleaning up your garage, the tools are still there, they are just neatly arranged on the pegboards, the floor is swept, and the boxes are stacked. Order is restored.
But if you clear it out,
If you clear out your garage, you are creating an absolute void. Every tool, every box, every speck of debris is removed. The shelves are barren. The space is returned to a state of zero, so a massive new object, the car, can occupy it.
understanding the creation of a void makes the emotional weight of the third scenario incredibly poignant. We spent the weekend clearing out my grandmother's old house.
That's a heavy one.
You aren't just dusting the furniture, you are permanently removing the physical evidence of a life lived. You are boxing up decades of memories, carrying them out the front door, and leaving behind empty, echoing rooms. It is a deeply melancholic act of total removal.
And we see the aggressive, urgent side of that total removal in the second scenario. The police told the crowd to clear out of the area. The authorities are not asking the protesters to stand in neat, orderly lines. They are demanding the complete and immediate evacuation of the physical space. They require the rapid creation of a void.
As we clear out those physical spaces, we need to examine what we elevate in our intellectual spaces. The phrase is bring up.
Ah, elevating ideas.
The definition is to mention a specific topic in a conversation, or R, to raise and nurture a child through to adulthood. It applies to awkward meeting topics and decades of parental biography. The conversational usage is highlighted first. Please don't bring up the wedding. They just broke up.
Let's explore the spatial physics of a conversation. Imagine the dialogue as a flat surface, like a dining table. All the current acceptable topics are resting on top of the table in the light.
Right.
A taboo or uncomfortable topic, like a recently canceled wedding, is a hidden object, resting quietly in the darkness underneath the table, in the realm of the unsaid. When you bring it up, you are physically reaching down into the obscurity, grasping the uncomfortable truth, lifting it into the air, and slamming it onto the table where everyone in the room is forced to look at it and deal with it.
That makes the anxiety of the phrase so tangible. You are dragging something into the light. We see the positive version of that elevation in the third scenario. I'm glad you brought that up. I was thinking the same thing. A brilliant idea was hidden in silence until someone elevated it for the group to admire.
The exact same vector.
But how on earth does that spatial metaphor connect to the second scenario, which is about raising a human being? She was brought up in a very strict household.
It is one of the most elegant connections in the English language. The spatial metaphor is exactly the same, but instead of happening in a 10-minute meeting, it is stretched over 18 years.
Okay, walk me through that.
A human child starts physically small, low to the ground, and intellectually ignorant of the world. They exist in a state of lower capacity. Parents bring them up. They literally watch them grow physically taller, elevating toward the ceiling, but they also elevate them morally, socially, and educationally.
You lift them up.
They lift the child out of the obscurity of infancy and elevate them into the capable, enlightened state of adulthood. Elevating an awkward topic to the table or elevating a child to maturity. The language uses the exact same vector of upward progression.
That is genuinely profound. The way we map physical space to intellectual growth is incredible. And that brings us to our 30th and final phrase of this deep dive.
We made it.
If you, the listener, have stayed with us through all of this analysis, through all the emotional peaks and mechanical breakdowns, you are going to need this one. The phrase is buckle up.
A fitting end.
The literal meaning is to fasten the seatbelt in a vehicle. The metaphorical meaning is to mentally prepare yourself for a wild, chaotic, or intensely difficult situation. The literal instruction provides the baseline in the first and third scenarios. Make sure everyone buckles up before I start the car. And the pilot told the passengers to buckle up because of the turbulence.
These are the direct, modern instructions for utilizing life-saving safety mechanisms. You are using a woven strap to physically secure your fragile human body to a heavy metal frame, ensuring you are not thrown or injured during periods of violent, unpredictable movement.
But the metaphorical usage, presented in the second scenario, is where the true linguistic magic lives for an advanced learner. Buckle up, guys. The next few weeks at work are going to be crazy.
I love that usage.
I want to speak directly to you listening to this right now. If you have truly digested the metaphors, the physical directions, the implied violence, and the emotional weight of the 30 phrases we've covered today, buckle up. Because your ability to engage with native speakers, to read between the lines, and to express your own complex, nuanced feelings in English is about to take off on a wild, accelerated ride.
It absolutely is. The speaker in that workplace scenario is utilizing the physical act of securing a seatbelt as a direct instruction for psychological bracing. They are announcing to their team, the environment around us is about to become highly unstable. The workload will be turbulent. Therefore, you need to engage your emotional and professional safety mechanisms right now. It perfectly encapsulates the entire theme of our discussion.
How so?
Well, the seatbelt is a relatively modern mechanical invention, yet almost instantaneously, human beings adopted it as the ultimate metaphor for mental preparation and emotional fortitude.
Let's take a moment to recap the incredible, expansive journey we've just been on. We took 30 simple phrases, most of them consisting of nothing more than a basic verb attached to a tiny preposition, and we completely unlocked their hidden architecture.
We went deep.
We really did. We saw how these tiny, seemingly insignificant phrases give you the immense power to describe the deepest, most intense internal emotional pressure cookers. We use them to map out the messy, complicated, sometimes beautiful, and sometimes devastating web of romantic pursuits and social breakups.
We covered a lot of ground.
We navigated the harsh, aggressive language of physical conflict and internal guilt, and we watched the mechanical systems of our world act up, black out, and force us to carry on.
And the true lasting value for you as a listener is the realization that true advanced fluency is never going to be found in rote memorization.
You can't just read a list.
No, you cannot simply read a dictionary definition of blow off or beat up and expect to wield those phrases effectively in a fast-paced conversation. True fluency is derived from understanding the deep spatial imagery encoded in the words.
The physical mapping.
When you speak these phrasal verbs, you aren't just reciting vocabulary, you are actively manipulating the concepts of gravity, space, physical pressure, and forward momentum. I highly commend you for taking this extended deep dive with us. By taking the time to understand the why behind the language, why up means anger, why down means peace, why breaking means clarity, you have fundamentally and permanently elevated your linguistic toolkit.
Before we sign off, we always like to leave you with one final provocative thought. Something for you to mull over as you transition back into your day, building on everything we've unpacked here.
Consider the incredible dual nature of the verbs we've explored today. Think deeply about the fact that we use the exact same linguistic structure to describe fixing the trajectory of a physical machine like backing up a car to clear a gate, as we do to secure vital, life-saving human loyalty, like backing up a friend in a hostile room.
It's the same language.
It is. Language is not merely a sterile tool for transmitting data. It is a mirror. It constantly, relentlessly reflects how we, as a species, inherently equate the harsh, mechanical, physical world around us with our deepest, most vulnerable emotional needs. As you go about your week, as you drive your car, organize your desk, interact with your colleagues, and clean your home, I want you to observe your own movements. Ask yourself, how many basic, mundane physical actions are you performing right now that might one day evolve into the metaphors for your most profound human feelings?
What a brilliant, expansive question to end on. Thank you so much for investing your time and joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep paying close attention to the spatial mechanics of the words around you, and never stop unpacking the world. We'll catch up with you next time.